Hi guys, Justin here, G0KSC, and this is the second time in 2 days. Well, after 2 years, getting 2 goes in 2 days can't be too bad, can it? I tell you what, I was watching back the video myself from after the recall, once I got it onto YouTube, that first one. And it was a little bit of a bittersweet moment, to be honest, because I was looking at it and thinking to myself, well, you have aged a hell of a lot in 2 years, or that camera quality has got a whole lot better. So to comfort myself, I've decided that the Nikon D5100 that I was using yesterday was substantially better than the USB PC cam that I was using 2 years ago or so, whenever it was. So I've changed it again now. I'm on another PC one. This is a 8K manual focus Super Carlos Fandango wide-wheeled version. So I think the quality on this is supposed to be pretty good as well, and I've had to put the hat on as well, just so that you can't see all those bags and lines everywhere, which was taking my attention away from what I was talking about. Anyway, I'm waffling. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to have a look at a couple of bits on the EZNEC program for you. The first thing is the download and update of EZNEC 7. As some of you may or may not know, Roy Llewellyn, who was the author of the EZNEC software, retired maybe 18 months ago. It might even be 2 years ago now, and as a parting gift he made EZNEC free, where it was at least $100 previously, obviously without support, but it made it free. So he made the version 7, and then for those of us that bought the Pro versions, which was more expensive, you had the EZNEC Pro 2, which I can't for the life of me wonder why anybody would want to buy. It gave you extra segmentations and you could open multi-instances, but you still had the NEC-2 engine, which is like 35 years out of date and riddled with bugs. So if you had that, you can upgrade to the EZNEC Pro version 7 for NEC-2 or NEC-2, or you could also upgrade to the EZNEC 7 Pro 4, which would give you the ability to use NEC-4 or NEC-4 within the software. Now, when I was just having a quick look to check that everything was where it needed to be before I did this video, I went onto the site and had a look, and I saw the updates page, which we're looking at now. And now when I looked at my software, I was on let's just have a look here, 7.0.1. So despite the fact that Roy's retired and some time ago, there's been at least 2 updates, I would guess, if this is 7.0.3. So then I started to drill to have a look and see what they were. Now I installed or downloaded and installed the updater. I didn't need to have any serial numbers or anything for that, because I'm updating an instance of EZNEC 7 Pro 4, which is already installed. But if you want the full program here, then when you click on that and click to download, it's going to ask you for your customer ID. Now that's on, when you bought the version of EZNEC Pro 4 originally, you would have had your customer ID plus a password, which gave you access to the site to download any updates. So on this bit, you just need the customer ID, and then you can download the full version. So why the updates? There's a couple of little bits. Now you see Dan Maguire on here, who it says that he did the bits and pieces with regards to the insulated wires. Apparently EZNEC 5 you couldn't model with insulator coated wires using the EZNEC program. He's adapted it so that you could do it on the others, NEC-2 and NEC-4, but apparently not on NEC-5. So that's sorted, and there's a couple of other problems sorted. Now Dan has been a pretty big supporter of the project in a whole. That's EZNEC and the NEC-5 as well, because when the code was originally released, the NEC-5 code, the original author of that, who was that now? I'm trying to think of his name. He wanted to get it from the Lawrence Livermore partnership. He wanted to get it sorted. Jerry Burke, that's it. He wanted to get it sorted before he was retired, or before he went to retirement, which he did, and he sadly passed away pretty much almost as he had retired. But there were some bugs, and some nasty bugs in that as well. Now Roy and Dan worked away at the NEC-5 program on behalf of the Lawrence Livermore Partnership, who administer the NEC-5 software, and got all those bugs out. And now we're on NEC-5 version 13. So if you've purchased it, then you can go to them and get the latest version, and that is pretty damn rock solid. If not, and you have the EZNEC Pro and you want to use with NEC-5, which I would highly recommend, then you can go to the Lawrence Livermore Partnership here. That's the address, and when you go in here, you can order the software, or the calculation engine NEC-5. Now, although here it says term 3 years, when it gets to the 3 years, at the end of the 3 years, they say, do you want to renew it? And you say yes, and then it's renewed for another 3 years. So it's not going to cost you £110 or dollars each of those times, but it is very much worth it. I will go over some of the details and comparisons with other softwares, including NEC-5 and NEC-4, in a separate video. But basically, pretty much almost without exception, all of the bugs that still existed in NEC-4, and there was a lot that it covered and cleared off the list from NEC-2, all of those have been fixed. Now, whilst NEC-4 was very accurate, when that started to become a little bit rocky is when you had 2 or more of the inherent flaws present in the same antenna. So if just one instance was there, it wasn't such a problem. If there was more than one, then it started to compound the problem, and off you would go. And as I was explaining yesterday, if you had, say, tapered wires on HF, it was much better than the earlier versions with tapered element correction. However, if you moved to 50 megahertz and then had tapered wires, then it would still start to get a little bit off skew. And because on, say, an LFA Yagi, where you've got bent elements in the driven element, plus the tapers, plus fairly close spaced elements, those 3 inherent problem areas together meant that you had quite a differential that you was trying to model against. So when you built the antenna in the real world, it may have been still requiring some manual finalization rather than it being absolutely spot on first time. So anyway, once you've downloaded that and you've bought that and you've put that into the software, if you open up your EZNEC and go to the options, here you'll see your selection for the calculation engines. So you've got the old NEC-2, the double density engine. Why anybody would ever want to use that, I really don't know. Then you have the EZNEC-4. Now, I can't remember if this finished off on 4.2 or not. It started off and it had NEC-4, then it had NEC-4.1, and I can't remember whether I finished with 4.2, but I chose and installed the external version of 4.2 because I purchased it and had the very final version of that before the end of the project and moved on to NEC-5. So I purchased that and 5. So I pretty much just use these as comparisons, and a lot of the time it gives me an idea as to how complex the model is by seeing what the delta is between the same model in these two. So I can select between the external version of NEC 4.2 and the external version of NEC 5. Now what I just did, I'm just going to do that again to show you that, is I selected the one below where it says external 4.2, so I can select where that source is, and external NEC5. So if I click onto either of those, it opens up a dialog box, and you can see that it's I've put these into the C drive, into the EZNEC 7 folder, into the documents folder, and then you have these two exe files. The one at the bottom is 4.2, and it's a 64-bit version. That's all in the title here, and you can see that's 5.1 meg. as a file size. Now on NEC-5 version 13 that you can see here, you can see that's twice the size. So there's a lot more data that's in there. So that's those two here. Now for comparison purposes and to show you the difference between the two, let me just resize this into this viewing screen. I'm having to do all this so I can keep it all nice and clean as far as YouTube is concerned. So I'm just going to center this and bring this up, and that was the typical segmentation density that I would use when using NEC-4, and that was fine on that particular software. It'd get, you know, relatively good results. So you can see on here with those, the segments or sections are around 7 segments per element. The problem is that, as I was mentioning earlier or yesterday, the problem now with NEC-5 is it does require a much higher density of segments. You couldn't do that on NEC-4 or NEC-5 because it became an issue. If the segment dense or the segment size was shorter than the element diameter, then it presented all sorts of problems and accuracy would go off. So although in one sense the more segmentation you've got, the more accuracy there is, it got to a point where it became inaccurate because it was an inherent problem. So you kind of had to go back from where you needed to be. The great thing with NEC-5, and I've tried this, and I was sharing some results and experiments with Lionel V7BQH on this, because if you have an error, if you've got a problem antenna, then often what you will find is you get average gain errors. So and that would be when you do a let's just find a 3D model. If I do a 3D scan, I'll put that down to 1 and then fire the model away. Down here you can see it's got average gain and it's got 9.86 at the moment. If I turn it to 0 loss wires and run that, if it's 0.000, it's no problem. If it's anything above 1.0, as this one is 1.0.1, then there is an average gain error. So there's something about this model that is not quite right. That means that it's not going to be as accurate as it otherwise could. Now when you look at this and you look at the screen here, whereas this has got a folded dipole on this antenna, and it has tapered elements and sharp corners at the ends, that's 3 of those inherent issues that you had in NEC-2, and that whilst improved in NEC-4 they wasn't ironed out completely, which would be causing the problem. Anyway, we was adjusted on this antenna for NEC-4. So if I go back to the wire loss and I add the aluminium loss back in, and then run the sweep, and you look at the antenna, let's just bring this into size for the screen, it looks kind of okay. You know, you've got a reasonable front to back, 9.6 dB, 29.6 front to back, so all is good. Now where it starts to get interesting is if I now switch to NEC-5 and run the model, because it now, let me just put that into take it out of 3D and just put it into the normal ASNOF sweep for the moment. So now you look at the model, it's 9.44 gains down and only 21 front to back. So why is that the case? Well, the telltale might be here. If I have a look, I'll switch back to NEC-4 for a moment, and I'll run now an SWR sweep between 50 and 50.4. And as you can see, it's a fairly nice flat SWR. You know, it doesn't rise very much between 50 and 50.4, and then dips at 50.21. So a nice stable antenna. Now, when we do that in the external NEC-5 and run that, let's do the sweep and have a look and see where it sits. You can see it's a different picture. The SWR isn't quite as flat, as well as the pattern obviously having lost some of the performance and SWR. Now when we look at here, the line at the bottom, and we place this wherever we want to place it, and we look at the details, you can see the impedance 57.65, and then J equals -2. Okay, now generally if J is a negative figure, the loop isn't wide enough, or the driven element isn't wide enough. If it's a positive figure, then it's too wide and needs to be reduced. So if we go back to the NEC-4 and run that sweep again, and then we look at that number, you see J is now at -0.1765. The ideal and the sweet spot is for J to equal 0.0, and this side to be 50 ohm. Then that's unity. But you're not going to get that 0 marker everywhere in the sweep, especially if it's a wide band antenna. So it is going to change as you move up or down here, which is why you've got the variance in SWR. Anyway, let's see if we can get this leveled up. I mentioned one of the points which you needed a much higher density of segmentation on NEC-5. The other issue, and which I didn't rectify when I did the sweep, is the source. Because the differences with the source between NEC-4 and NEC-5 is that NEC-4 uses odd segments in its odd segmentation, and NEC-5 uses even. So why does that make any difference whatsoever? So let's have a look at the model again, and if we zoom in here, the round circle here indicates the feed point. Now if I have that where it is, you can see it's pretty much center, and now I switch to NEC-5, what you would have seen is that now the feed point has shifted onto that dot, because instead of the feed point in NEC-5 being in the center of the segment, it goes to the beginning of the segment. So now when you look at that in comparison to the other antennas, it's not in line. So how you do that is or how you rectify it, I should say, is in the driven element at least, you would change that to a even number. So if I just change that, for example, what number is that? 7. If I change that to 8, you can see now it's moved to the center. However, with 8 segments, it's still not going to be enough. And generally, I aim for around 60 segments per half wave. So something like, if you did say 66 on a reflector, if you had fairly big taper through the antenna, quite a number of directors, but you didn't want the final director to drop off too much, then start a little bit higher on the reflector, so you end up in the 50s or something by the time you've equaled out the segmentation through the various different elements. So because we need a higher segmentation density, I want to change this to 14. You can see now on this one down here how many more there are in this position. So I'm just going to run through, that looks about right actually, 14 on the tips as well. So now on the dipole here, it's probably going to be about 13. I'm just going to do this approximate for the minute. 13. No, we wanted 14 there, didn't we? And then 13, 13. On the ends, where the very ends of the loop sections or end sections, they were just one segment. I've changed those to 2 now. And now I'm going to go through the rest of the antenna. This is probably about 12, no, probably 13 then. I'm just doing this by eye at the minute to get these leveled out. I'm not calculating it, and I don't need to measure out and see it that the segments absolutely match perfectly on a 50 megahertz antenna. This is close enough. So let's try this with 12, that looks about right, and then 14 again for the center on the next one, and 11 maybe. Yeah, I can get away with 11. So now if we do a sweep on the NEC-5 and see if it looks a little bit closer to the result that we had in NEC-4. So you can see now that the gain has come up, it's 9.5, and the front to back has come up to 24.94. So it wasn't necessarily that NEC-4 was a long way out, it was that NEC-5 or NEC-5 wasn't as accurate as it should be because the density of the segments wasn't enough. So let me just do a sweep now and see how things have changed, if at all. Now what you can see now is that there's a dip. The dip has shifted up band, and what that indicates is that although we can adjust the loop, we can see here it shows that it's nearly okay, but the impedance is 55. What this indicates is that the whole antenna is a little bit too short. So why does it indicate that? If the impedance, as you can see here, is 55, it's above 50 ohm, then the elements are a little bit short, or the D1, the first director, which largely controls the impedance, is too short. Extending that will reduce the impedance. Okay, now if the impedance was say 45, then you would need to reduce the length of D1 in order to bring the impedance up. So why don't we just do that? Well, the point is that we know that there's a difference, there's a variation in accuracy between NEC-4 and NEC-5. So whatever needs to change on D1 is going to need to change on the other elements in the same antenna in order to achieve the right result. Now, we already know as well, and we're in a fortunate position to know this, that the tapering elements on 50 megahertz using NEC-4 or NEC-2 doesn't present an accurate result. It's always going to be a little bit short, and in the real world the antenna would need to be finished with slightly longer spacing. So I'm just going to hit this off the mark again. I haven't done anything with this antenna before. It's a first try, but I've done it with others. So whereas this is 1525 at the moment, I'm going to just add 5 each side, 5 millimeters each side, and just we'll go with that and see where it comes out. So if you can just bear with me for a sec. I need to preserve connections as I'm starting to move the loop end with lots of different wires, so it will automatically shift out the connected wire to the same position. So these have got to be now 7 on these ones, and we'll move down to the next one, 92 that's going to be then on here, and then 300, so 1300 on the final element. So before we run the SWR suite, let's just have a look and see how different the plot looks. Now, gain is 9.54, so much closer to the 9.6 that we saw on the approximation from NEC-4, and gain, front to back is now up to 28.5, so much closer to the model that we were seeing originally in NEC-4. So let's run the SWR suite and see what it says. So now we can see that it's much flatter, it's shifted down, but we are still a little bit out on D1. Now what I found again is that where you have the compounded inherent flaws, in this case tapered elements with sharp corners, what we've got at the ends here, and the close proximity of at least these 3 elements, that adds another factor to the whole ball game, and that's that these 2 elements are more impacted from size than the others because of that spacing. So the likelihood is that the reflector and the first director are going to both need to increase in size by a larger amount than what the original NEC-4 model suggested. So let's just pick 5 again. This is going to be way too much actually. Let's do that as 3, and then 3 on the first director, and see how that looks. First we'll just do a sweep and have a look at that. Now 28.97, 9.54, so the gain hasn't changed very much. It might be that the reflector does actually have to come up a little bit more. And then the SWR sweep, we haven't changed anything on the loop or finalized the loop yet, but look at the difference now. That we haven't changed the loop, as I just said. All we've done is changed the first director and the length of the reflector, knowing that those compounded issues in NEC-4 are rectified in here, which would underpredict the size of reflector and first director, on the basis that these are all close spaced with the taper and the sharp ends on the dipole. So what I'm just going to do is do one more tweak, which is to add a little bit more to that reflector. Because it's a longer element, percentage wise it would be a greater amount that it needs to correct. 29.3 now, so that's not too bad. And let's do the sweep, and you can see it's not far off of where it was originally. In actual fact, if I was to just add 1 or 2 millimeters to the loop width, you'd probably find that that would center pretty much where the NEC-4 model had centered. So let's have a look. And where we go, just come up a little bit now, so it's come down in frequency, but the dip is not quite as low. So because the impedance is high, that means that the first director needs to increase in length slightly. So let's just put this to 14.51. Look at the sweep first. Sorry, the plot. No change on the gain, 28.89, and SWR sweep. And there you have it. You've got the dip now. It was 50.210 was the minimum dip, wasn't it, on the last one? So it's looking much more closely aligned with what we saw from the NEC-4 model. However, what you're probably saying is that, well, this now says 9.54 dBi, whereas the NEC model showed us 9.6. Well, remember we mentioned about the average gain issue, and when I run the average gain, or I run the sweep or the plot using the 3D without any wire loss, instead of it showing 1.00, it showed a positive figure, and that positive figure means that the gain is going to be over presented. So what should happen, and to confirm that this is much more accurate, we shouldn't have those average gain issues within NEC-5. So if I switch off the aluminium loss, I put it to a 3D model, and I run a plot, and now when we look at the bottom, you can see average gain .999, 0.00. So that means the gain representation that we're seeing in NEC-5 is much closer to being accurate than the NEC-4 model, which had the average gain issues. Now, the only final thing that I would probably do myself now is to switch the wire loss back on, and perhaps because that front to back wasn't quite up to that 30-ish, it's 28.89. Let's just put this back to the straight azimuth plot again. I would hazard a guess that maybe it was not quite needing that length on the reflector. So I'll pull it down a bit and see if that's made any difference. 8.6. So perhaps not, maybe it's the other way. Let's have a look. I'll put it up fairly big and see, because I think when you're doing these adjustments, if you make bigger steps rather than smaller ones, you get a much better indication as if you're going the right way or not, because the delta, the difference is quite large. So 29.01, so it has gone up a little bit, and so has the gain actually as well. Let's just check this, the sweep again and see how that looks now. So is that gone to 50.21? It's actually not bad, is it? It's pretty much a parallel now with those adjustments. Now, although I've got that, although it is a model that I haven't adjusted before, and I wanted to just pick an older model that I'd had on here and to make these adjustments to show you, there are a couple of points to note here. Firstly, I've done a lot of this. So I've taken models that have been done in NEC-4 and I've converted them and readjusted them to NEC-5. The second thing is that I'm quite aware of the inherent flaws in NEC-4, of which there's vastly greater number in NEC-5. So knowing what those flaws are, and then being able to look at an antenna model and see that this antenna model is going to be affected by these particular flaws, and then knowing what those compounded issues will result in terms of adjustment, it makes it a lot easier for me. But going through the process that I've discussed here should help you and give you a good indication as to how to replicate this and to really get a very good representation of your antennas in the real world once they've been developed and designed and finalized in NEC-5. And I assure you, once you get those built to the NEC-5 sizes and diameters, you will find a much better result than what you've ever done before. So that's it for today. I will go into more detail on some of these areas and drill down into other areas. There are some extra bits and pieces that we can do to improve the model replication even further, but these tend to be required on higher bands. On 70 centimeters for instance, it's important to go up a little bit higher. And just to advise you that whereas this one there was quite a delta between the two, this antenna still only uses 1/2 inch to 3/8 inch elements for the parasitic elements, and in the driven element it goes from 5/8, 1/2 inch, and then 3/8 at the ends. If the elements were all 5/8 to 1/2 inch or 16mm to 13mm or greater, then the errors would be greater still, because the older version, NEC-4, is using a thin wire kernel, and at 16mm and above it's not really very thin at 50 megahertz anymore. And whereas if you was using 16mm on 2 meters, the error would be even greater, because of course at 2 meters that 16mm element is like being 3 times the size on 6 meters. Does that make sense? So we'll cover all these in detail, but this is a starter, and just looking at it, it's like 35 minutes we've gone on for already, so I think that's probably enough for today. If there's any questions that you've got on this or some elaboration areas, let me know and we'll see if we can cover them off. So I hope you didn't mind me being looked down on in this way. I'll try and find a better place to place this camera, but I think it's quite a good one actually. It seems to be doing the job. So until the next one, we'll catch you later. Bye for now.